It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorne. Fran Lebowitz has always been uncowed by the world around her. She got herself expelled from 2 high schools. At one of them, she dressed up as Fidel Castro for Halloween. And, this was when Fidel Castro was really Fidel Castro. She moved to New York at 18 without even a high school degree and managed to talk Andy Warhol into giving her a column in Interview. Within a couple of years, she was a cultural phenomenon. Her 2 books of essays were bestsellers, and they're still among the funniest American books ever. But in the 30 years or so since her books came out, she's barely published anything at all. She says that these days, the only thing that scares her is putting pen to paper. Lately, she's mostly made her living talking, which, to be fair, she's also pretty darn good at. Martin Scorsese made a documentary about her called Public Speaking. She's also recorded an audio version of her books. Here she is describing a typical day in her life, circa 1974 or so.
My day, an introduction of sorts. 12:35 p.m. The phone rings. I am not amused. This is not my favorite way to wake up. My favorite way to wake up is to have a certain French movie star whisper to me softly at 2:30 in the afternoon that if I want to get to Sweden in time to pick up my Nobel Prize for Literature, I had better ring for breakfast. This occurs rather less often than one might wish. Today is a perfect example, for my caller is an agent from Los Angeles who informs me that I don't know him. True, and not without reason. He is audibly tan. He is interested in my work. His interest has led him to the conclusion that it would be a good idea for me to write a movie comedy. I would, of course, have total artistic freedom, for evidently comic writers have taken over the movie business. I look around my apartment, a feat readily accomplished by simply glancing up, and remark that Dino De Laurentiis would be surprised to hear that. He chuckles tanly and suggests that we talk.
Fran Lebowitz and I spoke in 2012.
Fran Lebowitz, welcome to Bullseye. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I read somewhere that you were expelled from high school. Is that true? Because I'm not able to cite my source because I don't remember it. And B, what were the circumstances?
Yes, it is true. Although, as you can see, not recently. The circumstances were murky even at the time. The school from which I was expelled was a deservedly small Episcopalian girls' school. I had not attended it for very long. I'd been there the previous year, and then just a month or 2 into my senior years when they expelled me. These were the days where you could be expelled from school with almost no reason, especially a private school. And these were also the days where parents instantly went on the side of the school. That no matter what the school complained about, your parents took their side. Not just my parents, in general. Children and teenagers faced a united wall of opposition. Now, the school complains about the kid, and the kid's parents sue the school. But this is not what occurred. So what the headmaster of the school, in his brief letter, said was that I was a bad influence on the other girls, and that I had usurped his power, whatever that could possibly mean. I was, a 17-year-old girl.
Were you hiring and firing teachers?
I mean, I really don't know what he meant by that. I think that in the end, I was expelled for what my mother used to call that look on your face. So I think I was expelled for general surliness, but not expressed, because I was not. People always think that I did something very dramatic, like I set fire to the school. You didn't have to do those things, and I was not that kind of kid either. I wasn't a blatantly disruptive kid, nor am I a blatantly disruptive adult. I had excellent manners then, and I do now, but my disapproval or disdain leaps to the fore no matter where I am. And I think that's why I was expelled. But I really am not positive.
There was really no inciting. Were there a series of small inciting incidents?
No.
Did you get in trouble before you got expelled?
I mean, I got little bits of trouble. We had a Halloween party, and I came as Fidel Castro, which was like 1969, I think. So it was, there was no wiggle room there to be Fidel Castro. And they disapproved of that. They made me take off my Fidel Castro mask, even though it was the best Fidel Castro mask you've ever seen. And I wore it with kind of, army fatigue-looking clothes, like khaki pants and We all had then, or not everyone in the school, old army clothes. That was the kind of fashion among teenagers at the time. So I had that, and I came with a cigar. I did not light the cigar in the school, so I got in a little trouble for that. Not tremendous. They made me take off the mask. I got caught smoking a couple times. It was not the same thing as getting caught smoking now. So no, nothing really big. My grades were okay. They weren't great, but I wasn't failing everything like I had in public school. No, I think it was just a general dislike for me.
Did you end up in this Episcopalian school because you were failing in public school?
Yes. I mean, I didn't get thrown out of public high school for failing because you still cannot. You cannot get kicked out of public high school for getting bad grades. I think it's just that the high school, told my parents that if I didn't go to private school, I would absolutely have zero chance of getting into college. And also because we had taken the SATs. And apparently the difference between my English SATs, which was a perfect score, which I no longer remember what that's supposed to be, and my math SATs, which was below the level you would get if you just, showed up, was the most extreme difference in the history of New Jersey. So I was required to go to a psychiatrist. The school made me go to a psychiatrist. I went to a psychiatrist 3 days a week during school time, so I was thrilled. The psychiatrist was near the school. I could walk over. And I went to the psychiatrist 3 times a week because they apparently thought this was some sort of psychiatric problem. Instead of what I could have told them then and what is still the case now, I have only half a brain. But they were surprised that I did very well even in English because I wasn't doing very well in my English courses because I was never awake in high school. The only time I woke up is when the bell rang. I would get up, walk to my next class, put my head on my desk, and fall asleep.
What was your relationship with your parents like?
My relationship with my parents from the time I started having problems in school was terrible. I mean, it was really terrible because they were in a fury at me. And because it never occurred to them maybe something was bothering me. That just wasn't the way we were brought up. I mean, I'm sure there were maybe parents who would have paid more specific attention to their children, but not generally, not among the people. Really, I think not generally at the time, so that I wasn't living up to their expectations. That was your job, by the way. Your job was not to express your specialness as it is now. Your job was to do what your parents said. And especially, I think, I'm a second-generation American. So you were out there with the hopes of your immigrant grandparents, your parents, and you had certain things you had to do because you were lucky. Which I did feel because they were constantly telling you that. And in that way, they were right. You are very lucky. There are no pogroms here. What is your excuse? Algebra compared to a pogrom, you have to admit, there is a sharp, distinction between these two things.
I mean, they're both stinkers, but...
Yes, but you have to admit a pogrom is worse. So you were supposed, and you were, in my family and in many Jewish families, you were supposed to go to college. Now, being a girl, you had less on your shoulders in that way because you were not supposed to do anything after that.
That's what I was wondering about because my mother, who's also comes from not that far removed from the old country family and is a little bit older than you, but not too much.
No one's too much older than
me. She went to college and lived at home while she was going to college. She's from Washington, D.C. and went to George Washington. And her parents didn't speak to her while she was going to college because they didn't think that she should go to college. They thought that she should be getting married or whatever.
No, in my family, you're supposed to go to college, then get married. And in my case, because my mother went to college. So in my case, I was specifically supposed to go to Radcliffe because my mother didn't get into Radcliffe. My mother didn't get into Radcliffe as far as my mother was concerned, and perhaps this is true. They did have a very small Jewish quota, and you had to be kind of a genius if you were Jewish to get into Radcliffe. My mother was and is not a kind of a genius. My mother may have been rejected for other reasons, I don't know. So I was supposed to go to Radcliffe, but I was certainly not supposed to not finish high school. But they never talked about, other than going to college, which is something you heard about from the day you were born, if you were a girl, they never had any other goals for you. And I remember the only thing I can remember my mother ever saying about my future was, she said, Francie, you should marry a college professor because you like to read so much. And if you married a college professor, you'd always be in a place where there were a lot of books. That was the sole encouragement or instruction I received for my future.
It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorne. My guest is the writer Fran Lebowitz. You can now listen to a collection of her classic essays in the audiobook version of the Fran Lebowitz Reader. They're read by Lebowitz herself. We spoke in 2012.
So when you were this age where you were getting booted from high school, it was also like 1967, 1968, 1969, right? And everything was going ape in the entire world. Was any of that stuff happening in New Jersey?
Yeah, it was happening everywhere, obviously, more slowly in New Jersey than, say, in New York. Yes, I suppose because people who are younger than me, which is pretty much all people, the way in which the more recent past has been shown to people, it looks like everything happens, coherently, but if you would look back in your own life, even 10 years ago, you would see that that is not the case. Yes, these things were going on. I do not believe, although there's no way of proving it, that my problems in school had anything to do with that. Probably because that stuff was going on, it was more fun to have been kicked out of school and just come to New York. But that may also not be true because it's, the truth is it's pretty much fun to be 18. Is it fun to be 18 almost no matter where you are unless you're in prison? So that since I wasn't in prison, and yes, that was what was going on in the culture at the time. But I'm not sure that that would have made a difference in my personal situation.
There's a great essay in one of your books, I think it's in Metropolitan Life, called Advice for Teenagers, where one of the pieces, there's numerous pieces of advice. One of them is to try and avoid signing contracts, even if you've reached the age of majority, because no adult would ever tell you that they are happy with a contract they signed when they were 19.
Yeah, probably 21, because that was, when I was young, 21 was the age that you reach your majority. I find it so amazing that now that people are so much less mature throughout their entire lives, they move that down. And they did that because of the draft, is why they did, because there was, people were vociferously complaining, and legitimately, that you could go in the Army at 18, but you couldn't, sign. I don't think signing contracts was really much of a thing. Yes. And now that I'm much older, I would say it's just better never to sign a contract at all. No matter how old you are, turns out you never are old enough to sign a contract. So that piece, which is in, I think, social studies, I wrote for Newsweek, which, as you know, has just died. And they had, I think, a back page called My Turn. The different person wrote it every week. And I wrote that piece initially for Newsweek. And received then, and up until like 5 minutes ago, endless angry letters from guidance counselors because I say something not flattering about guidance counselors. I guess they must still have guidance counselors because now even adults have them. They're called like life coaches or something.
It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorne. My guest is the celebrated cultural force, Fran Lebowitz. We spoke last year. When she was 18, she moved to New York City. She knew nothing about the place, but she wasn't scared at all.
There didn't seem to be anything bad about New York. There was no algebra. That's why, I wasn't frightened in any way. I remember when I told my parents I was moving to New York, my mother, who I would never have thought of as being very worldly, said, "But we don't know anyone in New York." And I thought my mother meant I wouldn't make friends. And so I said, well, that's all right, I'll make friends. But I realized, later, that she knew enough about the world to know, that's how you get jobs, that's how you find things. And I know that now because I spend about half my time getting kids jobs who are, the children of friends of mine. So I think it's very helpful to have that kind of ignorance when you're young. I think because it allows you to do stuff that maybe I wouldn't have done it if I'd known enough to be scared or thought maybe I wouldn't be able to get a job or I wouldn't be able to. No, I had, considering what a failure I was in high school, I was brimming with confidence.
Did you have a scheme?
Yes. I said, I'm moving to New York to become a famous writer. I had a book. I had a book of poetry. I wrote poetry, which I think is okay if you're a teenager to write poetry. For very few people, is it okay after that? I was not one of the people that would be okay after that, but I submitted my book. I wrote a book. It was called Poughkeepsie Blood.
Yay!
I submitted my book to Grove Press, which was the publisher that published a lot of poetry of, actual poets. I actually walked into the office. I looked up Grove Press in the phone book, got someone to type for me. I didn't know how to type. I still don't. Walked into the office barefoot. I used to walk around New York barefoot. Okay, now my feeling barefoot. Okay, and let me assure you, it was not cleaner then. Walked in barefoot to the office of Grove Press and allowed them to have my manuscript. Like, put it on the desk. This is my book.
Wait, I want to talk for a second about barefoot. Were you walking barefoot as a cultural identifier?
A lot of kids walk barefoot then. I mean, I didn't do it all the time. Once I got to New York, I used to drive barefoot. I got tickets all the time by the police for driving barefoot because they were always looking for kids doing that.
How did they know that you were driving
because
barefoot?
Because they would stop teenagers, like the New Jersey State Troopers would stop teenagers all the time, and so you would be stopped, and you were scared of the police. Mainly because they were going to call your parents, who you were much more scared of. And driving without shoes is against the law. It was then, and that would be the only thing they would find with me is no shoes, so you get a ticket. I didn't walk barefoot in New York for too long once I realized that it was dangerous to walk barefoot. But I did walk in a Grove Press barefoot. I did give them this manuscript and then waited for them to accept it. But it never occurred to me they wouldn't accept it. And let me assure you, this was at the level of all books of poetry written by 17-year-olds. There was nothing better about it than that. And then they rejected it, much to my shock. I was shocked. I also used to read that poetry at the Village Vanguard. And I happen to have been, and probably still am, a fantastic reader. And I was so good at reading this that a man from Yale invited me to submit my poetry to the Yale Younger Poets. I don't know if they still have it, but it was an incredibly prestigious poetry prize at Yale. And I did. I thought, well, that's more like it. I sent it to him, and the man wrote me a letter saying, this can't be the same poetry that you read. That's how good I was at reading it, but on the page, it's as terrible as it actually was.
It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorne. My guest is Fran Lebowitz. Lebowitz doesn't have children, but not having any direct experience with something has never stopped her from having a strong opinion about it. Here she is in an excerpt from her audiobook, The Fran Lebowitz Reader.
Your responsibility as a parent is not as great as you might imagine. You need not supply the world with the next conqueror of disease or major motion picture star. If your child simply grows up to be someone who does not use the word collectible as a noun, you can consider yourself an unqualified success. Children do not really need money. After all, they don't have to pay rent or send mailgrams. Therefore, their allowance should be just large enough to cover chewing gum and an occasional pack of cigarettes. A child with his own savings account and/or tax shelter is not going to be a child who scares easy. A child who is not rigorously instructed in the matter of table manners is a child whose future is being dealt with cavalierly. A person who makes an admiral's hat out of a linen napkin is not going to be in wild social demand. The term child actor is redundant. He should not be further incited.
Fran Lebowitz from the new audio version of her collection, The Fran Lebowitz Reader.
I think this is a sort of a question that's central to your career. You were then and are now a great performer. And I think, I listened to the much of the audiobook of books that I had already read, and I really enjoyed the performances in addition to the writing. So given that, why was your choice to be a writer? What was the thing about writing specifically, rather than going into the Village Vanguard or, going to San Francisco to the Hungry Eye and telling jokes or doing some other? Why writing specifically?
Snobbery, I would say, would be a part of it. I have an incredible reverence for books. It is my religion. And also, up until the point that I got my first actual writing job, I loved to write. I wrote all the time when I was a kid and when I was a teenager. The second I got my first tiny, $10 writing assignment from a tiny, tiny newspaper, suddenly I hated to write. And I realized that, I am so resistant to authority that I am even resistant to my own authority. So that the second I said, Fran, you have to write, which before that it was, I would rather write than do anything else. And that unfortunately has stayed with me.
Are there other things that you've been able to frame as indulgences that you can continue to do?
Well, reading. I mean, I've spent really most of, if you counted up the hours, I've spent probably most of my life reading. And I have probably almost never read without feeling guilty. I almost always feel there's undercurrent of guilt when I'm reading because I always feel I'm supposed to be doing something else. And I always am supposed to be doing something else. So when I was a kid, I was supposed to be doing homework. And as an adult, I'm supposed to be writing. So that, but that is certainly what I spent most of my life doing.
Did you really hate homework?
Hate. I hate work. I hate all work. I have never had any work that I enjoyed. I am by nature a sloth. I am really lazy and I really don't like to work. And I have always felt that I would have made a spectacularly competent heiress. However, this didn't happen to me. And I know heiresses. I know people inherited money. They're always looking for things to do. I'm always saying, are you crazy? You're an heiress. Lie on the sofa, read.
When you described the change that writing had, the role of writing in your life had when you became a professional writer, that it became work which you loathe, I was thinking, I mean, I can tell, and you've said how important writing is to you. Like that just sounds like a really painful bind to be in, to have this thing that you care so much about that's also so painful.
Yes, well, that perhaps counts for the dour expression on my face.
But I mean, for real, I mean, that's like...
That is for real. Yes, yes, it's painful. There are painful things in our lives that we don't seem to be able to, that we don't seem to be able to fix. Obviously, if I knew exactly what this was, I would fix it. I do not know what it is exactly. I have my theories. Other people even seem to have their theories about this. This is what surprises me, that there are many people who have theories about why I'm not publishing books. And I find it kind of odd that people care that much about why I'm not. I don't care that much about other people's work, but if I actually knew what it was exactly, things that you know the origin of, you have a high chance of fixing. I don't know. However, I do not believe that I will never write again. And since no one would accuse me of being a cockeyed optimist, probably I will.
It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorne. My guest is the writer Fran Lebowitz. We spoke in 2012 after she released an audiobook of her collected essays, The Fran Lebowitz Reader.
When was it that you decided that being funny was an okay part of being the kind of artist that you wanted to be, the kind of sort of doing the high-minded, as you said, snooty stuff that you wanted to do?
I mean, it just came out that way. I didn't really think about it. The first writing I published were book reviews, and it's my natural mode of expression. And also, I did notice, I did book reviews and then I did movie reviews. I did movie reviews because the movie reviewer got some real assignment from like the New York Times. And I did movie reviews and right away, people paid attention to them. And so the first thing I realized is people prefer movies to books. And more people will read movie reviews than will read book reviews. And the funniness just was there, so I didn't really think about it. It's not that I have a snobbish attitude toward funny and not funny. In fact, quite the opposite. I always can't stand people who or judgments that being funny is less serious than being serious, and of course that is not the case. But I certainly have always made a distinction between writing and show business, and show business is something I never liked. I don't like it now, and I participate in it to a certain extent. But to spend my life in it, I would never have wanted to do it, and I have had zillions of offers, zillions of dollars to do it. And I have, even though there have been very lean periods in my life financially, I've never, ever said, why didn't you take that $11 zillion from so-and-so? I never felt that.
Now, I've heard you say that before. And, I was thinking about, what is it, what conviction is it that you think that you hold that means that even if you're having a hard time supporting yourself through other means, that it still feels comfortable for you to say no to show business? I mean, I've met show business people. They're often creepazoids.
It's not that. It's that, I always knew, when my first book came out, I get literally an avalanche of offers of every description and ones that are beyond description. And And I was 27 when my first book came out, so now that's considered very young. It wasn't at the time, by the way. When my first book came out, not one single review said, "What a young writer." That is a common age to publish first book. But I did instinctively know that they don't give you this money for nothing. And they don't give you this money for the thing that you did, and this has always been true, and this will always be true. And it is not that I don't like money, or that I'm not materialistic. I'm an American, I'm in fact very materialistic. I just have always liked myself better than I like money. And what they ask you for that money, to me, is not worth it. It just isn't worth it. You're not going to find any person who ever was in movies or on television, who doesn't have lots of executives telling you what to do. People who absolutely cannot do the thing you do. It's a kind of a ludicrous way that the entertainment business is structured. It is. I guess business could be like that too. I guess you could be the president of a tire company and have no idea how to make a tire. On the other hand, it's unlikely that you go onto the factory floor and say, no, not that time. But they do that. And people accept this, and people, writers especially, in the movie business or in television, or they become so used to it that they have contempt for people who don't do it. It's often like screenwriters who say, "Well, you think your writing is carved in stone?" Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Yours is not, because they won't let you. My feeling is no matter how bad a television script is or a movie script is, that writer has done a better job than the executive telling them what to do could possibly do. So I don't have the right attitude for it today.
Have you ever been invited to do that thing called punch up, where
Yes.
where a bunch of people get paid very well to add jokes to something?
Yes.
How did you feel about that?
No. The answer is, that I probably could have done. Many things I was offered I couldn't even do. Television, I always said, that I couldn't even do it. I don't want to do it, but let me assure you, I could not sit in a room with other people and write. And that fast. The amount of work television writers do and how fast it has to be done. Punching up, which they will literally ask you, to fix this character's dialogue. Make this character funny. It's to me such a crazy idea of writing. If you look at movie credits and you see there's like 15 writers on it, what does that even mean? So
it means 15 other writers weren't credited.
Yes, but is there a doubt in your mind that any comedy you've ever seen would have been vastly improved with one writer? Okay, or vastly improved if the writer directed it. So that. Yes, there may be some kinds of writing like that I haven't been asked to do, but I can't think of any.
So when you had times in your life where things were thin, which I don't know to what extent they are. You're still an in-demand public speaker and so on and so forth.
But this is not a thin time.
Yeah. Well, first of all, maybe you could tell me about what those times were like, but also what you did to get out of them. Because you obviously didn't publish your way out of them.
This is true. I do all these lecture dates. I've always done them. Sometimes I do more than others because I get asked to do more than others. They're pretty lucrative. They're lucrative enough if you haven't expanded your way of life, to some, which I never did. So I never put myself in a position, of having to keep up a life that was psychotic, but when my first book came out, I did indulge my lifelong love of fine furniture. And as the years went on, I sold this furniture. Because I happened to be really good and knowledgeable about furniture, everything I bought went up in price. And so for a while, I lived on my furniture as it fled my apartment. Sometimes I don't even know how I did it. As far as I could tell, I bought an apartment in 1984. And I lived there for 26 years. I have no idea how I paid for it. Sometimes I look back when I sold my apartment, I looked at the $80 zillion it cost to live in this apartment. I truly have no idea how I paid for it, but I know I did because they didn't throw me out of it. I guess I just put stuff together and sold furniture. I'm guessing this is mostly what I did because I can't really think of how I did it.
I'm impressed to hear that you bought the apartment in 1984, which is like a couple years after your second book was published. And
7 years after.
So you went, you decided to go all in after you stopped publishing books.
Well, but I had published 2 bestsellers, so I had money. I didn't spend the money. I've never been in debt. I was never someone who thought, like the way apparently everyone else did, a credit card, it doesn't seem like money, does it? I always said, yes, to me it seems just like money. So I never spent more money than I made, and I never did that, and hence I have a lot of disdain for people who do. Not for people who have to because they have starving children, but for people who think 4 cars, that's the appropriate amount of cars to have. Stuff that people do that's nutty, that I think is nutty. I bought the apartment later because it took me a while to imagine that I could buy an apartment.
It's Bullseye. I'm Jesse Thorne. My guest is the writer Fran Lebowitz.
You run in fancy circles, and I'm sure other circles as well. But
yes, many.
I'm guessing that you have friends who like do things like have their own restaurants or hotels or something. I don't know what fancy people in New York exactly are like, but something like that. Do you ever feel weird or left out because you're the person that, has to get invited to the $300 plate dinner or something like that?
First of all, no.
Rather than inviting everyone?
No. First of all, no person who's ever been to a $300 plate dinner wants to go to one. But I have never felt, I would say that the luckiest thing in my life is that I am as free of envy as a human being could be. That doesn't mean I never feel it, but I almost never feel it. And so I think the reason I never feel it is for some reason, even as a child, I always know that you can't just covet something someone has. You have to be that person. In other words, you can't just have the plane. You have to be the person who can have the plane. And frankly, that's really not of interest to me. So I don't feel that way. I have never felt that way. I've never felt that what other people have or do in their life has anything to do with me.
What about the other part though? There's the part of like, I wish I had the fancy things that person had. But then there's the other part of sort of feeling bad that you can't do for that person what they do for you or something like that. Because
that's absolutely true. I cannot offer you a ride on my plane. On the other hand,
that's why I invited you on my show, Fran. Let's get down to brass tacks.
That's right.
I need a ride back to California.
Well, I can't give you that ride. On the other hand, I'm a pretty lovely traveling companion. So, I'm assuming that's why they give me a ride. They don't have to give me a ride, and, if I had a plane, I would give people's rides. But I don't have a plane. I will never have a plane. And so I don't think about it.
All you have to offer is a 1979 checker cab.
I do. I have that. I could give you a ride, although not now because it is in rehab.
I would imagine a 1979 checker cab spends a fair amount of time in rehab.
Well, mine does only because it's so highly maintained. Truthfully, I'm certain that the United States government has essential military technology that is not as carefully maintained as my car, because my car is, I would say, my marriage. It's the only monogamous relationship I've ever had in my life. And the reason for that is I've never gotten tired of my car. Every time I see the car, I think, what a beautiful car. And so it's in pretty tip-top condition. So it's often being attended to.
Do you have one of these secret stockpiles of pieces of 1979 checker cars?
No. And what I didn't know, and no one did, is that the checker car company was put out of business in a leveraged buyout in the early 80s. And the leveraged buyout, was some hideous invention of these financial people. Now it looks like nothing compared to the stuff they've invented since. But and so there was no notice. It just went out of business. It was doing very well, the company, but it went out of business. If I'd known, yes, of course, I would have bought, especially body parts. For many years, I thought it wasn't that bad a problem for engine parts because, as I used to say with tremendous confidence to people, it's a standard GM engine, meaning they're never going to stop making this stuff. I, a few years ago, had to have custom-made a fuse. Fuses cost, when they're available commercially, $1. Okay? Fuses that are made, you could put a child through college. Now, sane people say, especially sane people who are not zillionaires, the car is too expensive to maintain now. I'm going to sell it. And I get offers for it every time that car comes out of the garage. People crowd around, throwing money in my face.
Is it yellow? I remember seeing it in the movie, but I don't remember.
It is such a subtle shade of pearl gray that straight men
Oh,
think
yes.
that straight men think it's white. So whenever I have to get it out of a garage, I always say to the straight guys who work in the garage, it's that big white car. But it is not white. It is pearl gray, verging on oyster.
Where do you get a fuse made? Do you have to go to the guy that makes artisanal Edison bulbs for restaurants in Brooklyn?
There are all manner of businesses that cater to the very rich or very crazy. You could have anything made.
I wonder if this is resonant for you at all. But one of the reasons that I care a lot about you and your writing is that I remember first reading your books and people telling me that they're really funny. And things being funny is one of the most important things to me. And I had read books that people had told me were really funny before, and rarely were they really funny to me. Like sometimes they were wise or clever, but not like actually funny, the way that something that's funny is funny. And when I read your books, I thought, oh, those are really funny. Like I was laughing sincerely, not just as that kind of laugh that people make when they go see a Shakespeare play and they want to demonstrate that they got the reference in Elizabethan English or something. You know what I mean?
Yes, I think it's safe to say my books are free of Elizabethan English.
But that idea of having a book that is having writing that is both real writing and is funny, it's like Mark Twain and stuff like that. But it's something that is not often valued by people who also value, not being dumb or liking to read a book.
Well, it may not be very highly valued because it's not very frequent. It just isn't very frequent. It's not, there are some talents that are more common than others. Like acting seems to be a very common talent, by which I mean there are a lot of really good actors. There are so many really good actors that at any given time, 90% of the really good actors in America are out of work, okay? There are far fewer really good writers, and of those, there are far fewer really good writers who are really funny. It doesn't make these what it makes these talents is rarer, that's all. Why that is, I have no idea. So I think that it is true that there aren't a lot of really funny writers. When I published my first book, there was a lot of resistance to publishing this book. Because there was a belief that it was not modern. In other words, in 1978, someone at my publishing house said, there hasn't been a book of comic essays that succeeded in this country since the 1920s. And I said, well, that's because no one wrote one. Not because people don't like them. People certainly like things that are funny. This is, and people certainly would like a book that was funny. Of course, I have to say, since I published that book, it's an industry, but there's lots of books that are supposed to be funny published, and not a lot of them are funny. That is true.
Do you get the kick out of performing and saying something that's funny and having people laugh that people whose first calling is performance do?
Well, I enjoy it. I really enjoy being on a stage. I really enjoy, especially doing questions and answers with the audience. I find it so fun that I don't even think about it when I do it. I really enjoy it. I don't know. I've known in my life a couple comedians, if that's what you mean. It is not my impression that they enjoy it that much, and that may be because that's their work,
I get the impression it's sort of like it's sort of like the way drug users say it's really amazing at the beginning, and then you kind of get used to it, but you still have to have it, or else there's a hole.
Well, the comedians that I've known in my life, some of whom were very good comedians. I cannot think of a single comedian I've ever known who is funny in conversation, which I find bizarre, But I do know that, they very much are very anxious about performing. I don't know any that aren't. I've never met one that isn't anxious about performing. I've always wondered why people who have stage fright and things like that become performers. It is common, as I'm sure you know, that people whose entire profession is to appear before the public is afraid to appear before the public. I really enjoy it. I find it very relaxing. I have no anxiety about it at all. I have actually fallen asleep in the Letterman green room. And so I have absolutely no anxiety about appearing, in on TV or on a stage or whatever. I have really, like a junkie, it's good that you mentioned that, heroin addicts, they have only one problem. They're heroin addicts. I think that sometimes I've known many in my life, and I always think sometimes that's why they become a heroin addict. Heroin addicts don't worry about their marriage. They don't worry about their mortgage. Once you're a junkie, you have one problem, and that's you're a junkie. And I think I've taken all human fears, and I have only one fear, and that is of writing. So consequently, there's not enough left over to be fearful of being on television or being on a stage. I've just never felt fearful about it. I feel a tiny bit of anticipation because it's enjoyable. And that's all I feel.
Well, Fran, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show. It was really fun to talk to you.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
Fran Lebowitz, she and I spoke last year. An audiobook of her collected essays is available now. It's called The Fran Lebowitz Reader.